I think the perhaps not the donor interest side of it, because you've not been a donor or received donor funding, perhaps, but freedom. You mentioned that freedom to do research is restricted by many, and the same forces that shape publication. I think people need to hear this in terms of the mechanisms by which supposedly, quote-unquote, respected peer-reviewed journal publications or prestigious publications, the New England Journal of Medicine or, some of the other publications that people will be fairly familiar with, how these publications come into being and the funding that is so lucrative and so seducing for both the editors and other people in charge of the publications. How if this freedom to do the research actually shapes the publication itself because of the ownership of the publication?
It's the same thing. The same companies that control funding, even though it might be coming from the government and taxpayers, the culture is set by the industry and the government operating in the NIH, for example, are conforming to the beliefs that are favorable to the industry. Gilbert Ling happened to have one person in the funding oversight branch of the NIH. His whole career depended on one person thinking that objective research should continue in the area he was working on. But when that person retired, his funding was cut off. Same thing happened to the virus researcher. I can't think of his name right now. He was very famous as working in the retrovirus field. Okay. When he suggested that the HIV, AIDS, so-called virus, might not be harmful at all, his research money was totally cut off, and he was ostracized. Even in something as safe-seeming as astronomy, a famous astronomer named Halton Arp was doing various studies of galaxies, and he happened to photograph some galaxies that were obviously continuous. There was a band of matter between separate galaxies that there were no breaks in the line, but one galaxy showed a very different redshift from the other galaxy, and you can't have a single object connected by a band of matter, one end of it going at a vast speed away from the other one. He found several of those connected galaxies with very different redshifts, which essentially proved that the idea that the redshift indicates acceleration away from the viewer, that concept must be wrong because single objects had different redshifts. So they cut off his access to the telescopes so that he couldn't ever use them again. He had to leave the country if he wanted to use a telescope again.